Hello all of you beautiful people, Jules here from WhatCulture.com, and I am here today in this audio booth of dreams to talk to you about times that comic book stories were taken too far. So what does that actually mean? Well, in this day and age, the comic book industry isn't experiencing the heady highs of popularity it once did, and as much as you would expect successful superhero movies to translate into comic book sales, that isn't always the case. As such, writers and publishers often do whatever they can in order to keep their lines profitable, and that means coming up with sensational new angles to draw interest. However, that's not to say that all such experiences are positive, as what better way to get a swirl of attention to your comics than being outlandish, extreme, and sometimes downright offensive. And so without further ado, I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 times that DC went too far. Number 10. The death of Jason Todd, a death in the family. Despite its fame, this one sits at the bottom of this list because DC is not actually the only one at fault here. Well, I mean, they are, but not entirely, as fans famously despised the post-crisis version of Jason Todd, so when a death in the family was announced, DC provided a call-in poll asking people whether they wanted to save him, and it turns out, no, they did not. And so DC followed through with their word and showcased Joker smashing Jason Todd to death with a crowbar. It was the first time that DC had killed someone in such a visceral fashion, and it has stuck with us ever since. Number 9. Maxwell Lord murders Blue Beetle. Countdown to Infinite Crisis. The life of Ted Kord is one of the most fascinating in comic history, not just of DC. After being adopted into the DC universe during Crisis on Infinite Earths, Ted hung around helping out where he could. Sure, he wasn't as smart as Batman, but he definitely was more approachable and better with people. And seemingly for those reasons, that's why DC killed him off. And they didn't just kill him cleanly, oh no, they had Maxwell Lord pull one of the most confusing heel turns in villainy, leading him to blow Ted Kord's brains out, with the next panel hyper-focusing on his mangled death mask staring off into space as blood oozed from his skull. Countdown to Infinite Crisis really is a good story, but killing off Ted Kord and doing so in such a gratuitously brutal way, well, that was just stepping over the line. Number 8. Superman and Wonder Woman have literally earth-shattering sex. The Dark Knight Strikes Again. Just what even was The Dark Knight Strikes Again? Can anyone who's read this actually explain what the hell is going on? Because as someone who just got done reading it, and currently I'm trying to talk myself out of tearing out my eyeballs because of it, I am utterly stumped. There are so many points where this book goes too far that I barely know where to begin. But then I got to the point where Superman and Wonder Woman kill a lot of people just from having sex, and suddenly this entry became crystal clear. I'll spare you the context behind this because I don't really want to give it the honor of describing it, but basically Superman and Wonder Woman finally decide to bone, and the resulting sex causes earthquakes and tsunamis around the entire planet, likely killing hundreds if not thousands of people, and all for one stupid pun. Like, I am all for post-coital puns, but this was just creepy. Number 7. Alexandra DeWitt gets fridged. Green Lantern number 54. After the deaths of the other Green Lanterns at the hands of a psychotic Hal Jordan, Carl is recruited as the one and only remaining Green Lantern. Now, this soft reboot of the franchise left a lot of fans angry to begin with, but things got even worse with the fridge panel, in which the reader finds out that Major Force brutally murdered Carl's girlfriend and stuffed her body into a refrigerator for pure shock value. And, well, clearly just to give motivation to Kyle. This vexed writer and all-around awesome person Gail Simmons so badly that she coined the phrase "women in refrigerators," and then listed every single time a woman was violated, harmed, murdered, or depowered just to give a man motivation in either Marvel or DC's comics. The death served as nothing more than to give Carl something to be sad about, and it's a cliche that's been called out ever since. Number 6. LIAN Harper's death. Cry for justice. If there is anything that DC and Marvel have in common, it's that nothing is permanent. Popularity will always override permanence, and so it is why we've seen heroes and villains rise from the dead time and time again. Well, unless your name is Roy Harper, in which case I'm very sorry, because you are the DC Universe's punching bag and are never going to be allowed nice things. Now, it was hard just to pick one of the many injustices heaped upon poor Roy Harper throughout DC history, but maybe the worst offense of all was the casual murder of his daughter. And those who became fans in the 2000s know her as the kid who was killed in a single panel during an abysmal event comic called Cry for Justice. And it isn't just the death that irked fans so badly, it was just how casual they were about killing her. You get one panel of the heroes reacting to the death, then it's never brought up or acknowledged again in the comic. It was nothing short of shock tactics done poorly, and the fact that it took DC nearly a decade to realise that this wasn't a hill worth dying on is frankly atrocious. Number 5. Wally West murders everyone. Heroes in Crisis. Heroes in Crisis is an absolutely bananas event comic detailing a story about a murder mystery taking place around a therapeutic sanctuary for traumatized superheroes. Long story short, the killer is revealed to be Wally West, who had just returned to the DC universe after spending years in limbo. He used the VR therapy machines at the sanctuary to frame Booster Gold and Harley Quinn simultaneously for the murders, including his own, by the way, which wasn't really him, it was actually him from 5 days in the future, and it's here that I need to state the obvious, that it is quite a convoluted story. Still, they went along with the story, smearing Wally's good name with a huge deal of crap, and just remember that this was around the time that DC was pushing for its heroes to be held as standards of human decency that we could all aspire to. And these two statements do not interact. They simply do not. Number 4. Black Adam rips a man in half. 52. 52 is rightly regarded as one of the absolute best DC stories ever written in the last few decades. It was a series that pulled together a number of creators and put the spotlight on lesser-known characters like The Question, who rose up to occupy the void left by DC's Trinity. However, in this otherwise hopeful story of heroes coming together, there are also moments of gratuitous brutality. And well, you read the title to this entry, it's pretty clear what happens here, as Black Adam, once the previous wielder of the magic of the wizard Shazam, has since become the ruler of the nation of Kandak. Naturally, he isn't the nicest guy when it comes to people breaking his rules, as demonstrated when Black Adam decides to pay the embassy in New York a visit to say hi to the locals, grease the palms of the ambassadors, and maybe try some of that New York pizza that he's never had the time to try because of being in slug fights with Captain Marvel. Oh, and also, while he's there, he rips poor Terror Man in two. Number 3. Joker slices his face off. Detective Comics number 1. Scott Snyder's run on Batman and Tony S. Daniels' run on Detective Comics were both highlights of the New 52, but there were definitely times when they both could crank up the dark for no real apparent reason. The most famous example of this from Snyder and Daniels' tenure is from the lead-up to the otherwise excellent Death of the Family storyline, specifically Detective Comics number 1, where the Joker allows Batman to capture him and send him to Arkham, where he then gets in contact with the villain Dollmaker. Why? Well, because he wanted Dollmaker to slice his face off. In short, this was done entirely in order to get a rise from the audience and served no narrative purpose whatsoever. Number 2. Superboy Prime kills Panther. Infinite Crisis. Infinite Crisis is one of the most divisive event comics that DC has ever published, and most of this centers around whether or not it's hypocritical in its condemnation of grim, dark storytelling. On one hand, the lashings that this story gives the DC heroes, and by proxy DC as a company, for letting what was once filled with hope and optimism get so dour and grim and gory, is well deserved and satisfying to watch. But on the other hand, Superboy Prime punches Panther's bloody head off. Granted, that's not all he accomplishes in this scene, but it's definitely the most shocking and visceral of all of the acts of brutality that Superboy Prime commits whilst fighting the Titans. Not only was it just a dumb way to kill a character that turned out to have a much larger following than writer Jeff Jones anticipated, but it's so indulgently gory that it undoes, even if just a little, the very critique that it set out to make about the DC universe at the time. And number 1, Dr. Light rapes Sue Dibney. Identity Crisis. So it's here that we reach a crossroads. Now, gore is one thing. Gore can be entertaining as hell. If you're writing horror, it's almost expected, and sometimes it's the only death fitting of certain characters. A lot of the entries on this list revolve around times where gore was used without care or for no purpose other than to shock its audience. However, rape and mutilation is completely different. That's a different level, as this perversion to the body is something that will always cause audiences to sober up to any situation that it's used in. And when used in Identity Crisis, it angered its readers and its author personally. Identity Crisis up until this reveal was a legitimately fun closed-door murder mystery, but when it was revealed that Dr. Light had brutally raped Sue Dibney, whose equally brutally death set off this whole story to begin with, and that was what drove the League to wipe his and Batman's minds, all that was left was utter contempt for the whole thing. It's not just the fact that Dr. Light raped her, it's the fact that it was used to drive the plot in a completely tasteless manner. This, combined with Sue Dibney being so horribly murdered at the beginning, shows two things. That the writers of this story saw Sue less as a character and more of a plot device to motivate the heroes, and that they see sexual assault not as a sensitive topic that requires respect and a careful hand, but as a cheap way to make their story appear more adult and gritty. It did not land well with its audience, to say the least. And there we go, my friends. Those were 10 times that DC went too far. Please let me know what you thought about it down in the comment section below. And remember, as always, I have been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that. You can go follow me at RetroJ with a 0 over on Twitter. And I'll speak to you soon.